Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you could join us for this evening's Master Gardener program presented by the IFAS Hillsborough County Extension Office. My name is Lisa. I'm with the Tampa Hillsborough County Public Library, and I'm joined today by my pal over here, Ms. Shannon, who's going to be keeping an eye on our Q&A for us, and our Master Gardener volunteer, Judy Hanna. She's with a volunteer with the Extension Office, and she's going to give us the 101 on succulents and cacti today. Judy, since this is our first session in this series, I would love it if you could tell us a little bit about the Master Gardener program before we get started.
Master Gardeners are all volunteers, and we work through the Hillsborough County Extension, which the word extension means an extension of the University of Florida, which is an agricultural information process, research, information, publications, a land-grant college back at the turn of the 1900s. So we are in the community doing education, doing gardening, community gardens, butterfly gardens. We go to garden shows, we do help desk, soil testing, you name it, we do it.
That's fantastic. Well, folks, we are going to be diving right into our program. So I'm going to hand the reins over to Judy so she can share her program slides. And once we get that up and running, I'll go ahead and turn my camera off and let Judy be the highlight of the show here. And then we will pop back on afterwards to do our Q&A session. So we'll see you when we're wrapped up.
Right. So we're going to talk about Cactus and Succulents 101. All of these are either a cactus or a succulent. And so you can see the wide variety, the interesting colors, structures, and textures. Cactus can have some of the most beautiful, vibrant flowers. They are low maintenance, and it's one of the reasons I like gardening with cactus and succulents is because they are so low maintenance, and I can be a neglectful gardener. I just think that rain should water the plants, and sometimes I'm busy doing other things. The cactus are drought tolerant, typically. They are also very versatile. You can find them in containers, you can have them in your landscape. And we'll talk about the care and considerations both in containers and in the landscape. So first off, why is it succulent or cacti? So let's do this. All cacti are succulents, but not all succulents are cacti. Cacti are distinguished because they have a spine on the little cushions. But some cacti are not all spiny. Some succulents are spiny, but spiny succulents are not cacti. This is really confusing. So let's just take a picture here. So we can see over here that on the right-hand side, you have those little cushions and there's little spines sticking out. Left-hand side, although there's a big thorn, there are no cushions, and that makes it a succulent. So if you need some dinner conversation, you have it now. You can tell people what is the difference in a succulent or a cacti. So why does that even matter? Because people bring to me something and want to know, what is this? And I'm going to say, well, I'm going to have to look this up because this is a euphorbia. That's a euphorbia. And that just looks like a leafy little plant, doesn't it? And that's a euphorbia. So within all of the cactus and the succulents, these euphorbias are succulents, and you'll see that on the right-hand side is the crown of thorns, which was the example there of a thorny plant that is a succulent. A crown of thorns is not a cactus, it is a succulent. So there's quite a wide range of appearance. What's in a name can be important or not. Maybe we just call them the typical things, that we know, which is agave, aloe. A Christmas cactus is not a cactus, it is a succulent. The crown of thorns we discussed. I have a beautiful desert rose out in my yard, and it is a succulent. You can just slice a piece of that off and stick that down in the soil. Kalanchoes, we're going to talk about quite a bit when we talk about propagation. Some people may pronounce that word kalanchoe. Either one, pick your way of talking about it. Portulaca, these are ground covers and fillers. Sansevieria is common, sedum, yucca, we eat yucca. Century plant, we put those in our yard and they get big and beautiful silvery plants. So let's take a look at a few things here. Above all else, it doesn't matter what kind of plant we're talking about. We have to follow the right plant, right place. So when it comes to a cactus or a succulent, the first thing you think is, well, it should be in bright sun and I should keep it dry. That's not quite a universal rule of thumb, because there are cactus that grow in the rainforest, succulents that grow in the desert. So these are plants that have evolved over time to adapt to their environment in incredibly vibrant, varied ways. And what you need to keep in mind as you're selecting your plants is to perhaps read up a little bit in advance, or take your phone with you when you're going shopping and take a look at the plant and what its requirements are going to be. So right plant, right place for cactus and succulent is going to be important. So temperature highs, warm, you're thinking everything should be warm, but too warm is potential as well. Too cold a temperature, and this may apply primarily to cactus or succulents that are outside. So there may be days, even in Florida, that you're going to have to cover your cactus and succulents. And the things about really low temperature, if a cactus or succulent gets temperature damage, particularly cold damage, is that leaf isn't just going to fall off. It's going to have a scar, a brown spot that will probably be with that plant for a very, very long time. Moisture variations in the season. You see there's a picture there of the Christmas cactus, and when we have our Christmas cactus out blooming, we do water them. But if you have plants out on your lanai, plants in your landscape, or even plants in your office or kitchen or living room, you overwater them for one reason or another, that's going to be the most common reasons that we have a cactus or a succulent failing that we've bought and put in our environment. So well-draining soil is going to be a priority. Sunshade requirements we discussed. Size matters. Size matters. Cactus and succulents grow very slowly. Some of them, like the portulaca, spread out and can take over a pot. It looked like a pretty little filler to begin with, and then over time takes over the pot. I have sansevierias that are taking over a pot I have outside right now. So I'm going to take lots of those to my friends any day now. You can see down in the right-hand corner that century cactus. That century cactus is now bigger than my arms, further than you can imagine. If you had put that by your front door, then all of your people coming to your front door would get poked by that century cactus. I see this funny mailbox area out in an area of my neighborhood that has 3 sensory cacti around the mailbox. And I'm thinking, how unfriendly is that for the mail carrier trying to get the mail in there every day? So the mail carrier's safety is pretty important. Right plant, right place. So we're going to talk first about growing cactus or succulents in containers. So give you some examples of a little bit of a kitschy kind of perspective there. Cactus and succulents do well in pots because they grow slowly, because they don't get big, because they don't quickly drape out. You can have a fairly static landscape in a pot right away. You know what it's going to look like. So it's nice. It's nice for a gift because it's all ready. It's not a small plant that's going to grow into a pot, at least not right away. So when you're choosing your container, choose one that has drainage in the bottom. And I bought one of my favorites here. I was going to show you how I take care of that. So I have a clay pot. I love this pot. It works great. Has no drainage hole. So I can't really plant a cactus in there, particularly this kind that's not going to tolerate extra moisture. So I have a clay pot that I set inside, and then that works for drainage. Always have a hole in the bottom of the pot. Always put a layer of gravel in the bottom of the pot, because if you do get a little extra water in that container, then it'll go down into the gravel and hopefully seek out that hole in the bottom of the pot for you. Small pots are going to dry quickly, and that's just going to be a rule of thumb, whether you're growing cactus or succulents. So you may need to water a little more frequently than you would if you have a larger pot. Larger pots, henceforth, are going to stay moist longer. And the problem with a larger pot with succulents or cactus is that, for instance, in the case of this one, I keep using this as an example, this cactus or succulent pretty much takes up the diameter of the pot. There's very little area on the sides here. If you're going to use a pot that's larger than, pretty much have a big space on the side, your cactus isn't going to take it over it very often, very, very soon. So you're going to have a big space, and that big space is not going to have roots in it to suck up the water. So again, you may have a moisture problem with that. So trying to find a container that is aesthetically pleasing for what you want, but is not too large and therefore retaining moisture around the cactus, or too small that you can't manage the watering with it. Consider that you may have to move your succulent for changes in temperature or moisture, season, for instance. So the jade plant is a very good plant for lanais, for instance. It gets big, it gets full, it's very shiny, and it's a very sturdy plant. They're just lots of fun. But they get big, they get really heavy. And when a storm is coming up, they can be damaged by the wind, they can be damaged by the heavy rains, it's just too much water in it. So you have to consider, if you're going to have a big container, how can you move that for excessive rain, cold snaps, things along that line. And avoiding air currents is something that may be somewhat unique about cactus and succulents. We actually like to see palms and plants that have a little bit of motion, particularly out in our landscapes. That's why some of these landscape ornamental grasses are so popular these days. but air currents from a rotating fan, if you have something in your office at your desk, or an overhead fan, sometimes can be a little too much for a cactus or a succulent. So if you happen to have either moved in a fan or moved a cactus into where a fan could be impacting it, they just may not tolerate that. So in containers, you want to choose a well-drained soil. There are commercial cactus mixes that are just fine. You can go to any place that has landscaping materials and potting soils and buy a commercial cactus mix. That commercial cactus mix will have fertilizer in it. And so I will caution you at this point, because it's the last place on the slides here about fertilizer, is that most cactus, when they are being potted, don't need fertilizer. Cactus and succulents don't need fertilizer much at all, as a matter of fact. I have a little fertilizer, a liquid fertilizer that I put a squirt in the pot once or twice a year. So if you buy a commercial cactus mix and it has fertilizer in it, and all of your cactus die right away, either you got cactus at the store, or perhaps that fertilizer was just too much because the cactus or succulent didn't need it. You can mix your own soil with these proportions: 3 parts of just ordinary potting soil, 2 parts sand, playbox sand, whatever kind of, just has to add well draining to it, and 1 part perlite, which is those little white things. Now, my partner that oftentimes does this program with me in person, she uses perlite when she mixes up her potting soil. I use crushed lava rock that I get at a bonsai store and mix in that 1 part. And I have a good friend who uses crushed gravel. And so the perlite, the crushed lava rock, or the crushed gravel is just going to be teeny, teeny, teeny. You want to strive for a pH of your soil 5.0 to 6.5. So if you're buying a potting soil that's anything other than a cactus mix, and you can see what the pH is there, that would be the range that you would want to go with. So you are ready to plant. You've got a pot that is aesthetically pleasing for you. You've chosen it based on the diameter of the plants that you're going to put in there. So I just put here, 1 plant per pot can be quite striking. I love this one. It's just one of my favorites. Or you can make miniature landscapes, of which I have any number of little pots down there that you can see. You can blend forms and colors. You can use sort of the same idea that you would making a basic flowering pot of succulents or cacti, which basically is 1 tall, 1 a little bit bushy, and 1 that drapes over. And you can get cactus and succulents that do all of that. Make sure if you're putting a variety of cactus or succulents in a pot that they have the same watering temperature needs. So succulents tend to need just a little bit more water than, say, for instance, the thorny cactus that has the bloom on it that you see. You can keep plants in their original pot. Cactus and succulents do not need to spread out like a petunia does and get into the soil. So that makes it pretty easy. If you think something's not doing well and it's in that little original pot, just pluck it out, put it someplace else. You can remove pots and redesign whatever you would like with them. So cactus and succulents can be quite flexible. The potting process. We'll go quickly through this. Put a little screen, just a little circle, a little square over the drainage hole because you are going to have that gravel or that perlite in there. Put a little layer of small stones in there for drainage, again, to make sure that no moisture stays in the bottom of the pot. It's best to add water to the soil and just mix it up with your hands rather than the classic put the plants in the soil and then drench it. You actually don't want to do that. You never really want to have drenching wet cactus or succulent soil. Transfer the plant, fill the soil to 1.5 to 1 inch below the rim. And that actually says 1 inch, but I'm going to tell you the differentiation there. This one here is about 1/2 inch. And even that, I have a little layer of gravel. Many of my succulents in particular, I put the little pea pebbles in there. The pebbles multicolor about this size, so that you really want that plant, cactus or succulent, that's almost at the top of the pot. Whereas when you're planting begonias or whatever else you're going to put in a pot, you sink that down in and put a little layer of mulch or something. You want to keep the moisture around the plant. And a cactus or succulent, no. So we have filling the top with a layer of fine stones. I'll caution you again about fertilizing. As a general rule, fertilizer is not a go-to. How do you handle prickly plants? I mean, this is one of the challenge. Heavy gloves help, but they are very awkward and some plants are just not going to tolerate it. Some of the solutions you can use is just wrap a thick piece of paper, just computer paper, around the base of the plant and handle it that way. If it seems still a little difficult, put a rubber band around that paper base. I often just use 2 plastic spoons with a small plant, for instance, or 2 wooden spoons from the kitchen, and pick the plant up that way and put it in the pot. So we're going to move on to growing plants in your landscape. This is a yucca. We see these a lot in our area, and as we move south, quite a bit more. These plants, all cactus and succulents, are just the absolute master of water conservation. Those thick stemmy leaves collect water, plump up, and they give it up as they need it in the dry times. They control their own water use. So you can see your plant begin to shrivel, and it's okay. Give it a little bit of water and it'll plump right up. But all of these are adaptations for drought. Now, I ask you, and you're going to have to tell me whether you think right plant, right place. This is a prickly pear. You see this prickly pear has taken over the front of that house. Maybe that's the look that this homeowner wanted. Maybe this homeowner, like the homeowner that has those century cactus around the mailbox, they don't want people there, and they can put something like this in their landscape. But if you have small children, you have dogs, if you don't want this prickly pear just taking over your world, this might not have been the right plant that started out small and got bigger and bigger. The other thing to consider here is that this prickly pear, although it seems to be thriving, and the grass also looks green, I don't know how they're irrigating that lawn without fertilizing. So when you start to design a landscape, if you put this lovely garden of a palm tree and some succulents, maybe a gardenia, you have 3 plants that have 3 different water and fertilizer needs. Consider that as you design your landscape. The bottom line is that watering indoor or outdoors is going to be the make or break with your cactus and succulents. Always allow the soil to dry out between watering. If it's dry, just let it alone. Let it alone. If you got somebody house sitting, don't bother. Don't bother. Just leave my cactus and succulents alone. In cool, damp conditions, they will require less water. So in the winter months, or if you have this and maybe in the shade of a tree, if you have gray, silvery, or woolly leaves, they're going to need more dry soil than even just your cactus looking. And this gray, silvery, and woolly looking cactus and succulents are very popular these days. So consider, particularly if you're going to do a dish garden, what the watering needs are. And I mentioned before, protecting from summer rains. If your plant looks fat and happy, don't water it. I wouldn't necessarily say that about your impatiens or your azaleas. I would say have a regular watering schedule, but you have to adapt to the needs of the cactus or the succulents. So one of the absolute best things about cactus and succulents is you can propagate them easily, and all of your friends and family and co-workers and neighbors and communities of your state can have some of your cactus and succulents. So you can easily propagate them through what's called rooting offsets on plants like that kalanchoe, right at the tips of the leaves. There will come up a little rosette. And sometimes those leaves just go down to the ground, they start a new plant. Or you can just slice off a piece of that leaf and set it on the soil, and you will get it rooting. There is that third bullet there that says dust with a rooting hormone. Well, that's what extension says to say. I don't, I just put it on the soil, which is a little damp, and it will just begin to grow. You can do stem cuttings. Just use a clean, sharp knife, slice through that piece that you want to take off. Just allow that tip to dry, and then once you're ready, just set that in the soil. Now, something big like this one, you're probably going to have to use something to keep that suspended so that just the tip touches into the soil. Because if you stick that way down into the soil, it's just going to rot. So use some chopsticks or barbecue skewers just to hold that up. Now, this is a cutting from a voodoo cactus, so I don't really know whether your friends and family want this. It makes this big, spectacular bloom that is so terribly, terribly stinky. But it's definitely a fun succulent and one that easily propagates. Leaf cuttings. All you have to do is remove a leaf from, this is a red lips. You just slice it in half, let that gooey side harden off for a day or so, and then just put it in the soil, and you can see the bottom picture here. Out comes the new little plants. That's all you have to do. And I've shared a lot of plants that way and received a lot of plants that way. Plant division depends on the succulent or the cactus. What you see at the bottom is aloe vera. We've all gotten a lot of those. Take a clean knife, slice through the plant, and you're ready to go. Getting those tiny, tiny little cactus off of that mother plant there is going to be difficult. You're going to have to handle it with a little bit of tweezers, and it might be a little risky, but if you're adventuresome and want those little cacti to come off, that's the way to do it. Sharp knife, just set it on the soil. Cactus do grow from seeds. As a matter of fact, that desert rose I mentioned, when that grows from a seed, that's the one that gets the big hump. for the base and takes years to get a plant growing from seeds. Grafted cactus, all these lovely fun things that we see, these do not grow naturally. There's a stalk, a base. These are cut and then they are held on with a band of some sort, and we can buy them and have some fun with them. Pests. Lisa was just telling me that she has a pest now on one of her succulents. This happens not frequently. It's not like having fungal infections get on your crotons or getting mealy bugs on your azaleas and things along that line. Prevention is the best. If you are so inclined to go and look for an unhealthy plant at the back of the garden shop and want to nurse it back to health, be careful with a cactus or a succulent. Check it very carefully for any sort of disease. Cactus and succulents get the same diseases that our semi-plants get. Make sure you have lots of space and air circulation to manage humidity. Don't overwater, they get fungus. What you think might be a pest, and I'll show you some pictures in a moment, may actually be cultural. It might be water or light. Identify the pest and use IPM, and that's just an abbreviation for Integrated Pest Management, meaning use the less harsh chemical that you can to control the pest. And make sure if you buy a chemical that it says that you can use it for cactus or succulents. That might be something you would call the help desk at the extension office and say, I know that I have scale, as Lisa has on one of her succulents. What can I use to control it? So here's a list and just some nasty pictures of things. But these are all the things that eat in your garden, including rodents and caterpillars and birds. All of these can attack your outside or your inside cactus and succulents. But this is more likely the problem: scorch damage, too much sun, or high winds. So that is this top picture that you see. That is scorch damage, all the tips of that plant. You may also see that after we have had a freeze. And so just have to consider that cactus and succulents are not maintenance free. Etiolation, I just love that word. It's poor light or incorrect feeding. And I'll show you my favorite cactus here, and that is this one, which this is about 7 years old. It disappeared out of a garden pot. I found it months later under my deck, and it looked like there was the smallest bit of green on it. So I said, what the heck, I'll put it in a pot. And 3 years later, all of this damage, the cactus has survived its etiolation. How it got under the deck, I have no idea, but it survived. So if you don't mind funky things, you may just set it aside and give it a little bit of consideration. And so at this point, we're going to stop sharing and we'll have some discussions and answer some questions.
All right, let's get our slides back up. Here
We
we
do have a
go.
few questions. We do have a few questions.
Wonderful. So Miss Vivian's or Miss Shannon's going to keep an eye on those. We're going to give the folks at home a little bit more time to get those questions typed in. And while they do that, I'm going to go through a little bit more information. So first off, I wanted to make sure everyone had the contact information for the Extension Office and the Master Gardener program. So we've got that up on the screen there right now. So if you scan that QR code, that will take you right there. And for those of you who are in the live session right now, I'm going to drop into the chat box some links that you can click on for the various contact information for the Master Gardener. So we've got their blog and their social media and their homepage all linked into the chat box there. So either the QR code if you're watching this program afterwards, or in the chat box if you're live with us right now. And while we're on the subject of getting help for some of these things, we want to let you know, you can always check in with the library about some books and resources. If you're not sure exactly which one to get, staff in your local library are happy to help, or online on our Ask a Librarian service, we can point you in the right direction. So I picked these two, and I know Judy already took a look at them and approved of my selections. So we've got Cacti and Succulents Handbook on the left there by Gideon Smith. This is one that I have, and I like it because it really goes through and gives you a breakdown for your specific plants. It's a good reference book to have for growing cacti and succulents at home. And the one on the right I picked because I judged that book by its cover, and I was not disappointed. It's a very beautiful book. It's kind of what you would call like a coffee table book. Both of these are available on Hoopla, so if you don't have time to stop in and pick up a physical copy at the library, you can check these out anytime on Hoopla through the library. So just go to hcplc.org/ebooks, and we'll get you working in the right direction on those. All right, without further ado, I think we are ready to jump into our Q&A. So, Shannon, what do we have coming in?
How often do succulents in a container outside need to be watered, and what kind of light do they need?
Cactus and succulents will have a little different requirements. Cactus are going to need practically no watering outside. It will get enough humidity if it gets rained on. If we haven't had rain for a month, you might want to drizzle a little water around the base of the plant. Never pour water over the top of a cactus or a succulent with that. If you are going to bring cactus into your environment, take a look at where you bought it and consider that it looked good there, at least for a while, that it grew up to that point in a greenhouse somewhere, unless you're buying it at a show and they have oak leaves in the pot. Then you'll know that it came from under an oak tree. Try and mimic that environment for a short period of time. If you've read up on the plant, move it a little by little by little into the place you want to make sure every couple of weeks that it's going to be okay. Or just throw it out there and see what happens.
Fend for yourself.
You do just fine.
I have a prickly pear cactus that flowers every year. Each year I get more flowers and additional petals. I also have a very tall blue myrtle cactus, which flowered for the first time last year. I have had it about 5 years. What can I do to encourage the blue myrtle to flower again this year? The flowers are huge and amazing.
They are amazing. That blue myrtle just got old enough to flower. The prickly pear, we saw that, a picture of one. They actually, in some parts of Florida, are considered an invasive species. So they get started in cattle pastures, for instance. They're very vigorous plants. The blue myrtle, on the other hand, just like the century plant, it takes a while to mature, and keep it in the same conditions. It bloomed last year, although we've had an unusual weather pattern the last 12 months. So we'll just keep our fingers crossed. If you're thinking, I want to fertilize it, be very careful. And see Lisa shaking her head, but I know some people just itch to put fertilizer on. You think that's going to force a bloom. Just go very gently with it.
If it isn't broke, don't fertilize it.
There you go. There you go.
Where can you buy cacti?
Oh, well, I'll tell you, a great place to buy cactus and succulents is going to be at the USF Botanical Gardens plant sale, which is coming up in April. So there's also Green Fest that's coming up the end of March, and that is at the Garden Center. Carrollwood Village Park is having a plant sale April 8th. So usually at those environments, you have people from the Succulent and Cactus Society, of which we have one. You will have native plant growers there. And these are people who have this down to an art. Yes, you can buy it at a nursery or the big box stores. You're not sure exactly whether those are plants that just look really good or whether they're really good plants for us here in Florida.
You
But
know,
go
my
to those
favorite
three
place,
plant shows.
my favorite place to get plants that I know are going to do well here are I get on the group chat with my friends and I
Okay.
say, hey, I've got cuttings of some of this. Does anybody want to trade?
There you go. There you go.
Honestly, talk to your friends and neighbors and see who might have a green thumb. And if you say that you're open to receiving some cuttings, I guarantee you that your inbox will give you plenty.
Right. And just review those couple of slides on propagation. It's very easy with cactus and succulents.
The first book that I mentioned as well on the slides, that one has a great step-by-step pictures for propagating as well.
And one more question. If you do not have a green thumb and you want to start off with a cacti or a succulent, what would be the best or the easiest one to start with?
I would suggest get a Kalanchoe, red lips, something along that line. Sansevierias, those are the tall, thin, call them mother-in-law tongues. Some people call them that. Those will grow well in your lanai, on your porch. Sansevierias grow well inside or outside. And Sansevierias have so much variation. They're from dark green, silvery, to yellow and various greens. And the stripes on Sansevierias run vertically or horizontally. Kalanchoes bloom, and they are just magnificent blooms. Believe it or not, your aloe plants, when they're happy, will send up a shoot. And those shoots will be 18, 20 inches high and last about a month. So
Mine just finished blooming.
yeah. So those three plants are just good starter plants. Don't water them.
Looks like we got one final question in.
All right, perfect.
Yeah, they ask, what is the best environment for a lifesaver cactus? Some of their branches are turning green, and they're wondering if it might be too much water.
So a lifesaver cactus, they're kind of funny. They have a star shape, and in the middle, it'll be a red or a yellow ring, and then it goes in. So that's what a lifesaver looks like. So if you're wondering if you're watering it too much, probably yes. The other thing is those, is it a mature plant that it's been in the pot for quite a while? Those big kind of plants that spread out, they tend to sink down in the pot. And so instead of being just a little bit of a pot edge on there, now it's gone like this, and the plant's trying to grow up above it. So those bottom leaves, are they turning yellow? Maybe that's where you're seeing the yellow, which means there's too much moisture coming up from the soil. Although repotting cactus and succulents is problematic, they don't always adjust to that. You can put some pebbles in there. There we go, pot shards, to keep the moisture from the lower leaves. Does that help the lifesaver cactus person? Did that spark any thoughts? Ask more questions if you need to.
All right, well, we haven't heard back yet, but I'll remind the folks that they can always call that helpline. So if you look on our contact slide here, The library's contact information, hcplc.org/contact, has all of our contact information. But if you're looking to get in touch with the Extension Office and Master Gardener Program, we've got their help desk phone number listed there, 813-744-5519. Judy, what hours is that usually open?
That is usually open 8 to 4:30.
Okay. The
You
fairly
can leave
standard
a
business hours.
Yeah, leave
Okay.
a message. Probably one of the best ways to access help is to take pictures of your problem. Please don't send a picture of a dead plant. Dead plants tell no toes. I'm sorry. As it's starting to look not good, take pictures all around, put them in an email, send it to the Master Gardener help desk, and we'll take a look at it.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for all of that information and for my quick tips before the program even started. I appreciate those. Thank you all the folks that came in with questions and for joining us today. Our next program is going to be on edible flowers. So come see us for that Wednesday, April 26th at 6 p.m. It'll be on our events calendar, hcplc.org/events. We hope you can join us for that program. Shannon, thank you so much for wrangling our Q&A. And Judy, thank you so much for all of these wonderful tips.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Good night, folks. Thank you.